In Harlem's underworld, there was one law above all others. Bumpy Johnson's word was final. Break his rules, and you'd answer to him. Follow them, and you had protection, respect, and a place in an empire built on loyalty, discipline, and a code that even cops couldn't crack. This is the story of the rules that governed Harlem's most powerful criminal empire. Rules that protected the community, punished betrayal, and created order in a world of chaos. And one of those rules would determine whether you lived, died, or disappeared without a trace. If you're here for the real history, the codes, the strategy, the untold structure behind Harlem's underworld, hit that subscribe button now. We're breaking down the rules that made Bumpy Johnson more than just a gangster. They made him a leader, a protector, and a legend. Most people think crime is chaos, violence without reason, power without principle. But in Bumpy Johnson's Harlem, that wasn't how things worked. Bumpy didn't just control territory. He governed it. He established rules that everyone in his organization had to follow. He created systems that maintained order, loyalty, and respect. And he enforced consequences that made people think twice before crossing him. This was more than power. It was structure, respect, and survival. For Harlem families navigating these streets in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Bumpy's code meant something. It meant knowing that certain behaviors wouldn't be tolerated. It meant feeling safer from random violence because Bumpy kept order. It meant understanding that even in an illegal world, there were lines you didn't cross. But what were those rules? What did Bumpy allow in his territory? And what got you punished? Or worse, how did he maintain loyalty among hundreds of associates? And what made his code different from every other gangster who claimed to run Harlem? This isn't just a story about crime. It's a story about leadership, moral codes in immoral worlds, and what happens when one man's rules become law for an entire community. Let's break down Bumpy's code, rule by rule, consequence by consequence, and understand what it really meant to operate in his empire. Before we get into the specific rules, we need to understand Bumpy Johnson's philosophy, the worldview that shaped everything he did. Bumpy wasn't your typical gangster. He read constantly philosophy, history, military strategy, biographies of great leaders. He studied Sun Tzu's The Art of War, Machiavelli's The Prince, and the strategies of military commanders throughout history. He understood that raw violence was inefficient. Fear alone couldn't sustain power, and respect earned through brutality was fragile. It disappeared the moment you showed weakness. Bumpy believed in strategic power, power built on intelligence, loyalty, and systems that could function even in his absence. He wanted an organization that was disciplined, professional, and connected to the community it operated in. His core principles. 1. Intelligence over violence. Bumpy preferred outsmarting opponents to outfighting them. Violence was a tool he used when necessary, but never recklessly. Every action had to serve a strategic purpose. 2. Community connection. Unlike gangsters who just extracted wealth, Bumpy saw himself as part of Harlem's fabric. He understood that his power depended on community support, so he protected residents, supported black businesses, and maintained relationships that went beyond fear. 3. Loyalty above everything. Bumpy valued loyalty more than competence. He'd rather work with someone less skilled, who was absolutely loyal, than a genius who might betray him. Disloyalty was the one unforgivable sin. 4. Discipline and professionalism. Bumpy ran his operation like a business. He kept records, managed money carefully, paid people fairly, and expected professionalism. Sloppiness, recklessness, and emotional decision-making were not tolerated. 5. Long-term thinking. Bumpy played the long game. He built relationships over decades, made strategic alliances even with rivals, and thought about sustainability rather than quick scores. Here's what made Bumpy different. He understood that in a world where the law couldn't be trusted and the system was designed to oppress black people, communities needed alternative structures of governance. His code wasn't just about controlling crime. It was about creating order, predictability, and protection in neighborhoods where the police offered none of those things. For residents of Harlem, Bumpy's rules often mattered more than city laws because Bumpy actually enforced them fairly and consistently, while the NYPD was corrupt, racist, and unreliable. That's the context for understanding his code. Now let's get into the specific rules. Bumpy Johnson's empire was built on several key operations, each with its own guidelines. Rule number 1. The numbers game was sacred. The policy racket, Harlem's underground lottery, was the foundation of Bumpy's power and the community's informal economy. Running numbers was not just allowed, it was protected. Bumpy made sure payouts were made promptly and fairly, building trust with players. Runners were protected from robbery and police harassment. Operations were professional and well-organized. Profits were reinvested into Harlem's black economy. The numbers game employed thousands of people and provided hope to families who had nothing else. Bumpy treated it with respect. Rule number 2. Legitimate business was respected. Bumpy didn't shake down black-owned businesses. In fact, he protected them. If someone tried to extort a black shopkeeper, barber, or restaurant owner, Bumpy's people would intervene. He understood that destroying legitimate black businesses weakened the community and ultimately weakened his own base of support. Rule number 3. Alliances were strategic. Bumpy formed alliances with Italian crime families, corrupt politicians, and other operators, but always on terms that preserved black autonomy. He'd work with people, share profits, and maintain peace when it benefited everyone. But he never surrendered control over Harlem's day-to-day operations. Rule number 4. Professionalism was expected. If you worked for Bumpy, you were expected to dress well and conduct yourself with dignity. Keep your word and honor agreements. Avoid unnecessary attention from law enforcement. Manage money responsibly. Show respect to community members. Bumpy's people weren't street thugs. They were professionals operating in an illegal industry. But here's what made Bumpy's code unique. It wasn't just about what you could do. It was about what you absolutely couldn't do. And breaking those forbidden rules came with consequences that everyone in Harlem knew about. If this breakdown of Bumpy's leadership philosophy is giving you a completely different perspective on Harlem's underworld, drop a like on this video. It helps more people discover this side of history. Now we get to the rules that define Bumpy's code, the lines you didn't cross if you wanted to stay in his good graces or stay alive. Forbidden rule number 1. No harming innocent community members. This was Bumpy's most sacred rule. Violence was acceptable against rivals, informants, and people in the game, but innocent Harlem residents were off limits. You couldn't rob ordinary people in the neighborhood, assault women or children, cause collateral damage in disputes, bring violence near schools, churches, or community gathering places. Bumpy understood that his power came from community support. If residents feared his people as much as they feared the police, he'd lose legitimacy. Multiple stories from Harlem residents describe Bumpy intervening when street criminals victimized innocent people. He'd track down muggers, return stolen property, and make examples of anyone who preyed on the community. Forbidden rule number 2. No snitching ever. Informants were the worst betrayal in Bumpy's code. If you cooperated with police, testified against associates, or provided information to law enforcement, the consequences were severe and final. This wasn't just about self-preservation. It was about maintaining a system where loyalty meant something and where people understood that their silence was both expected and rewarded. The code of silence in Bumpy's organization was absolute. Even people arrested and facing serious time knew that cooperating would be worse than prison. Forbidden rule number 3. No disrespecting elders or women. This rule reflected Bumpy's own values and Harlem's cultural norms. You showed respect to elderly community members, women, especially mothers and grandmothers, church leaders, and respected figures. Anyone in Bumpy's organization who disrespected these people faced consequences. This wasn't just about morality. It was about maintaining community relationships and upholding cultural values, even within criminal enterprises. Forbidden rule number 4. No unauthorized violence. Violence required Bumpy's approval. You couldn't just shoot someone because they disrespected you or beat someone up over a personal dispute. All violence had to serve a strategic purpose and be sanctioned by leadership. Reckless, emotional, or unauthorized violence brought attention from law enforcement and destabilized operations. If you had a problem with someone, you brought it to Bumpy or his lieutenants. They'd mediate, make decisions, and determine appropriate responses. Vigilante actions were punished severely. Forbidden Rule number 5. No stealing from the organization. This seems obvious, but Bumpy enforced it absolutely. If you skimmed money, stole product, or cheated the organization in any way, you were done, and often literally done. Financial integrity was crucial. Bumpy ran detailed operations with careful accounting. He paid people fairly, but he expected absolute honesty in return. Forbidden Rule number 6. Hard drugs near schools or in certain areas. This rule is controversial and debated by historians, but multiple accounts suggest Bumpy had restrictions on where heroin could be sold, particularly near schools, churches, and certain residential blocks. While Bumpy was involved in drug operations, especially in his later years, he reportedly tried to minimize the visibility and accessibility of heroin in specific community spaces. This wasn't altruism, it was strategy. Blatant drug dealing near schools brought community complaints, law enforcement attention, and eroded the support Bumpy relied on. These weren't just suggestions, they were law in Bumpy's territory, and enforcement was swift, certain, and public enough that everyone knew what happened when you broke the code. But how exactly did Bumpy enforce these rules? What happened to people who violated the code? And were there exceptions, or was justice absolute? Bumpy Johnson's code only mattered because he enforced it consistently and visibly. Here's how consequences worked. Level 1. Warnings and economic penalties. For minor infractions or first-time mistakes, Bumpy might issue warnings or financial penalties. Someone who was late with payments, sloppy with operations, or disrespectful might lose privileges, have earnings docked, or be publicly reprimanded. These consequences were designed to correct behavior without destroying relationships. Level 2. Physical punishment. More serious violations, disrespecting community members, unauthorized violence, or repeated mistakes, could result in beatings. Not random violence, but measured punishment designed to send a message without permanently crippling someone. This tier was about correction and deterrence. Level 3. Removal from organization. Some violations got you fired, kicked out of operations, cut off from protection, and left to fend for yourself. This was serious, because being outside Bumpy's organization in Harlem's underworld made you vulnerable to rivals, police, and anyone with a grudge. Level 4. Exile or disappearance. The most serious violations, snitching, stealing large amounts, or betraying the organization, resulted in exile, being run out of Harlem entirely, or disappearance. Informants, in particular, faced lethal consequences. Everyone knew it. The code of silence was maintained through the absolute certainty that cooperation with law enforcement meant death. Legendary enforcement stories. The Mugger Incident. One story, recounted by multiple Harlem residents, describes a young criminal who mugged an elderly woman near her church. When Bumpy heard about it, he tracked the mugger down personally, beat him severely, made him return everything he'd stolen, plus extra money as compensation, and publicly apologized to the woman. The message was clear. Harming innocent community members wasn't just against Bumpy's rules. It was a personal insult to him, the disloyal lieutenant. Another story involves a trusted associate who was caught skimming money from the numbers operation. Bumpy didn't act immediately. He investigated carefully, gathered evidence, and confirmed the betrayal beyond doubt. Then he called a meeting of his key people, presented the evidence publicly, and had the man beaten and removed from the organization. The public nature of the punishment ensured everyone understood the consequences of disloyalty. The informant. Details are scarce, for obvious reasons, but multiple accounts suggest that known informants simply disappeared. No trials, no public executions, just quiet, permanent disappearances that served as warnings to anyone considering cooperation with police. Here's what made Bumpy's enforcement system work: consistency and proportionality. He didn't fly off the handle over small things. He didn't kill people for minor mistakes. But when serious rules were broken, consequences were certain and severe. People knew where they stood. They understood the code. And they knew that following it meant protection, respect, and opportunity, while breaking it meant losing everything. That predictability created stability in an otherwise chaotic world. So what did Bumpy's code actually mean for Harlem residents? The people who weren't in the game, but lived in neighborhoods he controlled? Positive impacts. Reduced random violence. Because Bumpy prohibited unauthorized violence and harming innocent people, Harlem residents in his territory were generally safer from random street crime than in areas controlled by less disciplined operators. Community protection. Bumpy's people actively protected residents from predators, corrupt cops, and outside threats. If someone victimized you, you could go to Bumpy, and he'd handle it more reliably than the police. Economic stability. The numbers game provided employment and hope. Bumpy's protection of black businesses allowed them to operate without constant shakedowns. His organization circulated money through the community. Dispute resolution. Bumpy mediated conflicts between residents, business owners, and even families. He became an alternative justice system in a community where official justice was racist and corrupt. Cultural respect. By enforcing rules about respecting elders and women, Bumpy upheld cultural values that mattered to the community. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a leader who reflected Harlem's values. Negative impacts. Normalized criminality. Bumpy's code made crime seem noble and orderly, potentially influencing young people to enter illegal enterprises instead of pursuing legitimate paths. Drug trade participation. Despite restrictions, Bumpy's involvement in heroin distribution contributed to the addiction epidemic that devastated Harlem in the 1960s and 70s. Alternative to reform. By providing protection and services, Bumpy's organization may have reduced pressure on official systems to reform, allowing police corruption and systemic racism to continue unchallenged. Moral ambiguity. Living under Bumpy's code meant accepting a criminal as a community leader, creating ethical complications that haunt Harlem's legacy. The truth is complex. Bumpy Johnson's code created order, protection, and community connection in a world where official systems failed black people. But it also perpetuated cycles of criminality and violence that had long-term costs. For Harlem residents who lived through his era, Bumpy represented both the best and worst of what happens when communities have to govern themselves because the system refuses to serve them fairly. And that legacy, that complex, contradictory, deeply human legacy, continues to shape how we understand power, loyalty, and survival in black communities to this day. Real question for you. If you lived in 1950s Harlem and had a serious problem, someone threatening your family, a corrupt cop shaking you down, a dispute you couldn't resolve, would you go to the police or to Bumpy Johnson? There's no right answer, just honest conversation about survival and trust. Drop your thoughts below. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, but his code didn't die with him. The principles he established, loyalty, discipline, community protection, strategic thinking, became templates for how power could be exercised in black neighborhoods when official power structures were hostile or absent. You can see echoes of Bumpy's code in community organizations. Civil rights groups and black power movements adopted similar principles about loyalty, discipline, and community protection, applied toward political rather than criminal ends. Hip-hop culture. The emphasis on respect, codes of conduct, and street governance in hip-hop reflects the same values Bumpy embodied, adapted for a different era. Organized crime. Later black criminal organizations looked to Bumpy's model of professionalism, community connection, and strategic thinking rather than pure violence. Cultural memory. Bumpy became a folk hero in Harlem, a symbol of black power, intelligence, and resistance against oppression. His code became legend, representing how black people governed themselves when white systems failed them. The dual legacy. Bumpy Johnson's code reveals an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most effective governance comes from people operating outside the law, not because crime is good, but because official systems are so broken, corrupt, or racist that communities must create alternatives. His legacy forces us to ask, what does it mean when a criminal provides better protection, more consistent justice, and stronger community support than police and courts? What does that say about the system? And what does it cost communities when they must rely on illegal structures for survival? There are no easy answers. Bumpy Johnson was neither hero nor villain. He was a complex human being who built power through intelligence, loyalty, and a code that meant something in a world where official rules protected white people and oppressed black people. Bumpy Johnson's code wasn't written down. It wasn't taught in schools or enforced by courts, but in Harlem during the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, it was as real as any law, and often more effective. His rules created order in chaos, protected communities from predators, and established standards of conduct that even criminals recognized and respected. Was it perfect? No. Was it moral? Complicated. Did it cause harm alongside the protection it provided? Absolutely. But it was real. It mattered. And it reveals something profound about power, leadership, and what happens when official systems abandon the communities they're supposed to serve. Bumpy Johnson's code was more than criminal governance. It was survival strategy, cultural resistance, and a testament to Black people's ability to create structure and order even when the system tried to leave us with chaos. His rules governed an empire, but more than that, they governed hearts, minds, and a community that still remembers him not just as a gangster, but as a leader who had principles and stood by them. That's legacy. That's power. That's what it meant to live by Bumpy's code. If this deep dive into Bumpy Johnson's code gave you a new understanding of leadership, power, and survival in Black communities, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're committed to telling the complete story, not just the crime, but the context, the complexity, and the cultural truth. Next up, we're exploring Bumpy's final years, his relationship with Malcolm X, and what happened to Harlem after he died. Like this video, drop a comment telling me which of Bumpy's rules surprised you most, and share this with anyone who needs to understand this history. This is our legacy, complicated, powerful, and deeply human. See you in the next one.